The Irish Sea, a bridge between ancient worlds. Kingdoms have risen and fallen on its shores, and in the year 1066, another was about to be shattered. From the wreckage of a great Viking army in England, a warlord of mixed blood, Godred Crovan, fled west across the Irish Sea with his followers, seeking sanctuary from his ally, Godfrey MacSitric, on the Isle of Mann. But the refugee would not remain a guest for long. Through betrayal and the sword, he would forge the Crovan dynasty, a line of kings that would rule the kingdom of Mann and the Isles for nearly 200 years. He was the product of a unique hybrid people forged in the crucible of this sea, the Norse Gaels. But who were these people really? To find the answer, we must journey back to the world they were born from. Prior to the end of the 8th century, the Irish Sea was a world connected by water, yet divided by culture. Along the coasts stood powerful Gaelic and Brittonic kingdoms. Ireland was divided into many different Gaelic regions, each controlled by numerous petty kings. The Gaelic domain of Mann lay central in the Irish Sea, facing Northumbrian Angles upon the mainland's western coast. Spanning parts of Northern Ireland and the west of Scotland was the Gaelic Sea Kingdom of Dalriata, while to the north and northeast lay the vast lands of the Picts. These were distinct societies linked by trade, marriage, and by frequent territorial disputes. Then, from the late 8th century onwards, something new started to appear on the horizon. Fleets of longships from the north bearing terrifying dragon heads. These impressive vessels carried daring Northmen from Scandinavia, crossing the perilous North Sea in search of wealth, land, and opportunity. These seafarers became known to history as Vikings. Vikings like the feared Ívarr the Boneless, who in the mid-9th century led the great heathen army's conquest of Anglo-Saxon England and founded a powerful dynasty that would dominate the Irish Sea for centuries. Or men like the formidable Norwegian king, Magnus Barefoot, who also left an indelible mark on these lands when he swept across the Western Isles with fire and sword towards the end of the 11th century. These people came from a warlike maritime culture forged over generations across the North Sea. By the end of the 8th century, a perfect storm of failed harvests, land hunger, and political ambition forced them to search for new lands overseas. Attacks at the monasteries of Lindisfarne in 793 and Iona a year later in 794 AD marked the first recorded Viking raids on the Isles of Britain. However, by the middle of the 9th century, this pattern would soon change. What started as lightning raids soon evolved. These Vikings were no longer just raiding and leaving, they were staying. Fortified camps known as long ports and trading bases started to appear along the coasts of Ireland, the Isle of Man, and across the Hebrides. Their arrival brought unspeakable violence and hardship to many communities, with gruesome tales of their barbarity echoing through the ages. During this time, a new people began to emerge from the fusion of Norse and Gaelic identities. Medieval writers described them as the foreigner Gaels. As Norse settlers adopted local customs and intermarried with local Gaelic populations, this new culture was born. From the mid-9th to the late 12th centuries, they would come to dominate the Irish Sea region. The House of Ívarr was the first and most powerful of these Norse Gaelic dynasties, but others would soon follow, creating a vast maritime domain. Their power was based in the great coastal cities they controlled in places like Dublin, Waterford, Limerick, and in their island strongholds of Mann and the Hebrides. From this network, they also founded powerful lordships in places like Galloway and Cumbria. But the influence of the dynasty's founder, Ivar the Boneless, reached even further. As a leader of the Great Heathen Army, he shattered the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria, capturing its capital, Eoforwic, which would later become the great Viking city of Jorvik. This entire cultural heritage was born the moment the first Vikings settled on these lands. Over generations, their customs, language, and law intertwined with the Gaelic world, creating a layered identity that would define these lands for centuries. But while the Norse Gaels themselves would eventually assimilate, becoming increasingly Gaelic until they were no longer a separate people, they left behind an indelible mark. And the ultimate evidence of their legacy is not just found in chronicles or carved on stones. It is etched into our very DNA, with modern genetic studies now revealing startling answers about the true ancestry of the people living across these coastal lands today. It is to these very lands that we now journey, as we explore the many places where these powerful sea kings held sway, going through the epic sea battles that took place over the centuries, and also delving into the daily lives of the ordinary people who created this hybrid world, understanding their language and culture, all in an attempt to answer the single defining question: who were the Norse Gaels? The story of the Gaels begins in an age long before the fall of Rome. Their origins trace back to the Celtic peoples who had spread across much of Europe during the first millennium BC. In Ireland, this powerful Celtic influence forged a unique people who spoke a Gaelic language. By the first centuries of the Christian era, the island was a patchwork of small kingdoms, each governed by its own ruler. This early Irish society was rural, tribal, and defined by a strict warrior code and a deep oral tradition. The Tua was the basic political unit, a kingdom of a people rather than a fixed territory ruled by a king chosen from a royal dynasty. Society was highly stratified, with a powerful warlord aristocracy and influential learned classes of poets and lawyers. From this Irish heartland, Gaelic communities began to travel eastward across the narrow waters of the North Channel. They started centuries of movement that would carry their culture into the land that would one day be known as Scotland. But how this later Gaelic world was established is a matter of intense historical debate, with two very different stories to tell. One powerful story, preserved for centuries in ancient writings, tells a tale of migration and conquest. This view holds that before the Gaels arrived, the lands of Argyll were already home to an indigenous people known to the Romans as the Epidi. According to this tradition, these native Britons were overthrown by Gaelic immigrants arriving from the kingdom of Dalriata in Northern Ireland. Ancient tales trace this movement back to legendary Gaelic figures. The Venerable Bede writes of a Prince Carbra Riata who was said to have fled a famine in Munster and led his people to Antrim and then across the sea to Scotland around 258 AD. A century later, around 329 AD, the three Colla brothers are said to have come from Ireland. Clan MacDonald tradition honours this event by claiming descent from one of the brothers, Colla Uish. The great Norse Gaelic warlord, Somerled, was said to be a descendant of this line. The pivotal moment in this narrative came around 498 AD, when a historical figure, Fergus Mór MacCurk, and his brothers allegedly moved the royal seat of Dalriata permanently from Ireland to Argyll. In this version of history, Scottish Dalriata was an Irish colony that grew to overshadow its homeland. It was from this event that the first identity of Gaelic Scotland began to form, with the Latin name for the Irish, Scotia, travelling with these settlers until it belonged to Scotland alone. However, modern archaeology presents a very different picture to this story. The idea of a large-scale Irish colonisation or invasion of Argyll finds no support in the archaeological record. Investigators expecting to find evidence of a native British population being violently supplanted by Gaelic newcomers find instead a seamless story. There appears to be no break in the settlement history of Argyll during this period, nor is there any archaeological hint of substantial immigration from Ireland. This lack of evidence has led to a vastly different theory. In this view, the native Epidi were never conquered, they were transformed. Through centuries of close contact, trade and exchange with their powerful Irish neighbours, this Brittonic people gradually evolved into Gaelic-speaking Scots. This theory finds powerful support in the earliest written sources. The most telling evidence comes from the man who should have known the story best, Adovnan, the 7th century abbot of Iona. He was an Irishman and a close confidant of the kings of Dalriata. Yet, in his famous Life of Columba, Adovnan is silent. He makes no mention of Fergus Mór MacCurk. He offers no hint of an Irish origin for the kings he knew so well. And what of Fergus, the legendary founder of Gaelic Scotland? He is completely absent from the early records. In fact, Fergus does not appear in any text until around 950 AD, when his story was added back into the chronicles, hundreds of years after he was said to have lived. So we are left with two origin stories. The first is a tale of conquest, an epic foundation legend. But it's a story told by later kings, likely a political narrative crafted to construct a prestigious Irish ancestry. The second story is one of transformation, told not by words, but by the silent evidence of archaeology. Yet each of these paths lead to the same undeniable reality. By the close of the 8th century, a Gaelic world was firmly established on both sides of the North Channel, a sea kingdom connected by a patchwork of local dynasties and a shared warrior culture. It was this established world that would soon face the arrival of a new and formidable power from across the North Sea. The creation of the Norse people was a layered process. It began after the last ice age as hunter-gatherers from east and west mixed on the newly thawed Scandinavian peninsula. But this first foundation did not last. It was swept away by two great waves of newcomers who almost completely replaced the existing populations. The first wave brought farmers from ancient Anatolia, introducing agriculture to the region. They were followed by Indo-European herders from the Great Steppe. This final migration was decisive. It brought the genetic stock that would define the Norse people. It forged their social structure, and from its language would spring Proto-Germanic, and in time, the tongue of the Vikings. During the Nordic Bronze Age, this new hybrid society consolidated, creating a social blueprint that would endure for 2,000 years. Fueled by wealth from the amber trade, a society of competing chiefdoms emerged, commanded by a powerful warrior elite. Their status was displayed through great halls, rich burials, and the might of their fleets. At the apex of this society were the kings and jarls who competed endlessly for power. At the very bottom were the thralls, or slaves, who performed the heavy labour essential to the economy. But the true backbone of this society was the great class of free farmers known as yeomen, who either owned their own inherited lands or worked as tenants for the aristocracy. This period established the core of Scandinavian culture, a maritime economy, decentralised politics, and a warrior ideology, where status was tied to wealth, won both by trade and the warrior's axe. During the Iron Age, a restless world of Germanic peoples was forged across Scandinavia. From the Danish peninsula came Jutes and the Angles, the peoples who, in the 5th and 6th centuries AD, would begin their great migration to Britain. The lands of modern Sweden were the homeland of two great peoples. The Swedes built powerful fleets, noted even by the Roman historian Tacitus. It was also the world of the warrior Geats, a tribe immortalised in the epic of Beowulf. To the west, tribes like the Rugi settled the rugged coastlines that would one day become Norway. All were part of a world stirring in the north, and it was these people, the direct heirs of this long and formative history, who at the close of the 8th century were ready to set sail. In the final centuries before the Viking Age, two forces were converging. In the halls of power, Scandinavian leaders began to forge larger kingdoms, commanding the loyalty of a formidable warrior aristocracy. In the coastal shipyards, craftsmen perfected the clinker-built, sail-powered longship, a technological marvel that gave them the strategic mobility to project that power across immense distances. By the late 8th century, a perfect storm was brewing that would unleash this new potential. The trees of Norway from this time tell a story of crisis. Using a method called dendroclimatology, scientists have analysed ancient tree rings and discovered a pattern of extreme and repeated summer droughts. This environmental crisis fell upon a land already at its breaking point. A rising population was putting immense pressure on the limited farmland available in Scandinavia's rugged landscape. The severe droughts would have meant catastrophic crop failures, leading directly to widespread starvation and social unrest. Faced with starvation at home and the tightening grip of consolidating kings, the Norse people looked to the sea. The recently perfected longship was not just a tool for warfare, it was the means of escape and survival. a vessel that could carry a desperate people to new lands. The Norse did not arrive in a world at peace. The Northern Isles of Pictland, like Orkney and Shetland, likely knew of Scandinavia long before the first raids. But these were lands already torn by their own internal conflicts. The historian James E. Fraser points to a pivotal event. In 681 AD, the great king of the Picts, Bruda, son of Beli, launched a devastating assault from his power base in Fortriu against the people of Orkney. This attack shattered the local power of the islands, leaving them weakened and exposed. It was into this fractured world that the Norse first came. They seized Shetland and Orkney, then pushed further to the Hebrides and then to the Scottish west coast. Once power bases were established, they looked for more land, trade and plunder in places like Ireland. For them, this Atlantic frontier had become an irresistible prospect. The Viking Age arrived, and the Irish Sea was transformed. What was once a boundary became a central highway, a navigable corridor that the Norse would turn into their own strategic domain. The Norse were skilled and practical seamen. They did not conquer vast lands, but instead seized and controlled vital geographical choke points. Central to this strategy was the Long Port, an Irish term for a Viking ship enclosure. These fortified naval camps were the foundation of Norse power, built along rivers and estuaries as secure bases for both raiding and trade. These early camps were the seeds from which some of Ireland's greatest towns would grow. The Northern Isles, or the Norðreyjar, lie closest to Norway. It was here that Scandinavian influence first took root, becoming a natural extension of the Norwegian homeland. Orkney, Shetland, and the northern boundaries of Pictland all fell under firm Norse control early in the period. To the south lay the Souðreyjar, or the Southern Isles. This great scatter of islands, including the Hebrides, created the perfect raiding ground. A fractured landscape of hidden bays that naturally fostered a decentralised sea kingdom. Across this entire zone, Norse culture was dominant for centuries. The Viking settlement of Dublin, known then as Dublin, was a direct result of its riverine geography. The city's position at the mouth of River Liffey was fundamental to its rise. The Norse read this map with a predator's eye. They saw that at the mouth of the River Liffey, a sheltered black pool offered the perfect defensible harbour to found a permanent stronghold. From this long port, established around 841 AD, the city of Dublin would rise to become the engine of their economic power, a base from which powerful dynasties would extend their influence across the Irish Sea. On the west coast, they found a similar prize, the island fortress of Limerick, a strategic gateway controlling the entire Shannon River system, a dagger pointed at the agricultural heart of Ireland. The Isle of Man is the spider at the centre of this maritime web. Set in the middle of the Irish Sea, its central position made it the unchallenged command centre of the Viking world. The island offered both defensible mountains and fertile land, with a coastline dotted with perfect harbours. This allowed it to become the capital of the powerful Kingdom of the Isles, a legacy demonstrated by the survival of the Tynwald. the world's oldest continuously operating parliament, which was founded by Vikings well over 1,000 years ago. In contrast to these centres of power, the vast island chain of the Hebrides was a rugged periphery. This fractured landscape of islands and hidden bays could not support large, centralised towns. Instead, it actively forged a different kind of society, a decentralised world defined by raiding and small coastal settlements. To the south, another frontier zone was forged, creating a people so defined by this constant cultural mixing that they earned a new and powerful name, the Gael. And the land they came to dominate still carries the echo of that name to this very day, Galloway. Its very name preserves the story of its creation. The landscape tells a tale of fusion, with place names preserving traces of 3 distinct layers of settlement: the original Brittonic, the later Gaelic, and the new Norse. The historian Richard Oram has argued convincingly that this new political identity was the result of influential Viking settlers integrating into a region that was already culturally mixed. And while documentary evidence is thin, the Annals of Ulster provide powerful glimpses into the politics of this hybrid kingdom. They record the death of the independent king Sweeney, son of Kenneth, in 1034 AD. Later in the 11th century, the links to the wider Norse Gaelic world become explicit. At his death in 1064, a ruler named Ecmarcic MacRoganvaldr is recorded as the king of the Rins of Galloway. He belonged to the same powerful dynasty that had once ruled Dublin and the Isles. Galloway was not a simple kingdom, but a complex hybrid polity, whose leading dynasty maintained its strong maritime links with Argyll, the Isles, and even Norway, well into the 13th century. These centuries of turbulence created a persistent tension between the Gael and the Norse. Yet this was not only an age of conflict, it was also an age of exchange. Trade, marriage, law, and religion crossed cultural lines as easily as ships crossed the tides. It was precisely this dynamic that would forge the world of the Norse Gaels. For 50 years, Ireland had been a land under siege. By the 820s, Viking longships had reached the most distant headlands of the coast. And by the 830s, the Irish annals record the establishment of the first fortified camps, or longports. But the Ireland they raided was not a unified kingdom. It was a fractured mosaic of some 150 petty kingdoms, ruled by rival overkings in Connacht, Leinster, Munster, and the 2 competing branches of the powerful Neil dynasty in the north. This constant internal feuding made the island a tempting target. But its very fragmentation proved to be a powerful defence, making it impossible for the Vikings to achieve any lasting territorial control. When the first wave of Norsemen attempted to consolidate their gains in the 840s, they were met with fierce resistance, and their ambitions were finally broken in the year 848, when a series of devastating Irish victories shattered their armies. The established Norse forces in Ireland were broken. The first chapter of the Viking Age on the island was ending in failure. And it was into this chaos that a new and far more formidable force arrived, led by a man whose name would become a terror in the annals of 4 kingdoms, known to history as Ívarr, the Boneless. The Irish chronicles of this period make a crucial distinction. They did not see all Norse Vikings as the same. The established Norse settlers, weakened by their recent defeats, were dubbed the Fair Foreigners. But the group that arrived with Ivar Ragnarsson was something new, something more dangerous. The chroniclers gave them a different name, the Dark Foreigners. What followed was a brutal Viking civil war on Irish soil, as this new band of warriors fought to dominate the groups who were there before. The struggle culminated in the year 852, when the Dark Foreigners won a decisive victory. With their rivals crushed, their leaders came to settle in Ireland. From the very next year in 853, the names of these new masters begin to appear in the Irish annals. 3 kings of the Dark Foreigners, Olaf, Ivar, and Osle. The fragmentary annals of Ireland state what the chronicles had only implied. These men were brothers. And it was this brotherhood, this family enterprise of conquest that would become the stuff of legend. Centuries later, in the great halls of Iceland, storytellers would weave their history into a grand, heroic myth, giving them a mythic father in epic works like the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok and the Tale of Ragnar's Sons. The sagas claim that Ivar and his brothers were the sons of the mythic hero Ragnar Lothbrok, and their great invasion was a unified act of vengeance for their father's death. It is a compelling and epic backstory, but it is not supported by the contemporary historical chronicles. The early annals offer no link to a legendary father. Instead, the strongest proof that these men were indeed brothers comes from an act of shocking violence. In the late 860s, after their future campaigns in Britain, the Annals of Ulster would record that their brother, Osle, would eventually be killed by his own kinsmen, with the annals naming the culprits as his own brothers, Ivar and Olaf. Another brother, Halfdan, was also active across England and Ireland, a family bond confirmed by the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. These were not mythic heroes seeking vengeance. They were 4 historical brothers, Olaf, Ivar, Osle, and Halfdan, a family enterprise of conquest, destined to carve its own bloody legacy across the lands of Ireland and Britain. After their notable successes in Ireland, the brothers expanded their ambitions to the east. In the mid-860s, they unleashed what appears to have been a coordinated 2-pronged assault on the island of what is now called Britain, with the southern campaign being led by Ivar. Between 864 and 871, his career would be forged in the wars of Anglo-Saxon England and Strathclyde. And in 865 AD, he arrived in East Anglia as a leader of the infamous Great Heathen Army. The origin of this formidable force is a mystery. Contemporary chroniclers like Asser claimed it came from Denmark, while other accounts stated it arrived from the north. It was likely a composite army, perhaps even including a contingent of Vikings from Ireland that Ivar brought with him. As Ivar carved his way through the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, his brothers, Olaf and Osle, opened the second front in the north. In 866, the Annals of Ulster record them leading a combined force of Vikings from Ireland and England into the very heart of Pictland. The annals state they raided the kingdom and took hostages in a highly successful campaign. The climax of this 2-front war came with the capture of Everwich. The Viking army in England, led by Ivar and his brother, Halfdan, stormed the Northumbrian city on November 1st, 866 AD. This date was specifically chosen for its brutal effectiveness. It was All Saints' Day, which was an important festival, where many of the city's leaders were gathered, unsuspecting, in the cathedral. The city fell in the surprise attack, though the Northumbrian kings Aella and Osbert escaped the initial slaughter. After wintering on the Tyne, the Viking army was forced to fight for the city a second time. In March of the year 867, the two Northumbrian kings returned with an army, attempting to retake their capital. The result was a massacre. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records an extensive slaughter of the Northumbrians, in which both King Aella and King Osbert were slain. With this bloody victory, the city was secured, and it was remade as the capital of Viking territory in England, a great trading hub that would be known by its Norse name, Jorvik. In that very same year, with his own work in the north seemingly complete, Olaf returned to Ireland. With major footholds now established in both the north and the south of the island, the stage was set for the next great campaign of the Ívarr dynasty. In the year 870, the brothers Ívarr and Olaf set their sights on their most ambitious prize yet, the impregnable fortress of the North Britons, Alt Clut. This was the Rock of the Clyde, the capital of this ancient Brittonic kingdom, which was ruled by King Arthgal. The fortress was considered impregnable after surviving multiple sieges over the centuries. During this siege, the defending Britons managed to hold out for a period of 4 long months. But in the end, it was not an army that broke them. It was thirst. The Welsh Chronicle states that the well inside the fortress failed, and the valiant defending garrison, now with no water supply, was forced to surrender. Ívarr and Olaf then brutally sacked and destroyed the ancient stronghold. The scale of this victory is made clear by what happened next. The Annals of Ulster report that the two brothers returned to Dublin the following year, with a fleet of 200 ships laden with Britons and Picts taken as slaves. A fleet of that size would have carried a formidable fighting force of between 6,000 and 8,000 men. The fall of this rock was a turning point, with its ancient name, Alt Clut, vanishing from the historical records soon after. Though the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle reports that Ivar's brother, Halfdan, led further attacks against Strathclyde in the year 875. In fact, this Brittonic kingdom would survive for nearly 2 more centuries, acting as a constant player in the region's politics, until it was finally annexed by the Kingdom of Alapa under King Malcolm III in the 11th century. So why this persistent Viking interest in Strathclyde? The answer was pure strategy. For the Norse, who now controlled kingdoms in both York and Dublin, the Clyde Valley was a vital land bridge across Britain, a strategic highway connecting the east and west coasts. The southern reaches of the kingdom contained the remains of the old Roman road network. And even after the fall of Viking Northumbria, its shores remained a crucial gateway to the Irish Sea for the future generations of the Dynasty of Ívarr. And while the written sources for the kingdom's history are limited, the archaeological and place name evidence tells a clear story. During the 9th and 10th centuries, a large-scale Norse Gaelic influence became visible in the southern parts of the kingdom, in areas like Cumbria and Galloway. This suggests that settlers, influenced by the politics of Ívarr's dynasty, were migrating from Ireland, turning this ancient Brittonic kingdom into a new frontier of the Norse Gael world. After their successful campaigns in Britain, the Annals of Ulster detail the two Viking kings, Olaf and Ívarr, returning to Dublin in 871 AD. They arrived with a vast fleet bringing shiploads of slaves captured from England and Strathclyde to trade in the city's markets. In the years that followed, Olaf returned to the island of Britain, journeying north into Pictland to exact tribute. But this was not the same kingdom the Vikings had shattered decades earlier. In the aftermath of a devastating Norse victory in 839 AD, the old Pictish northern power base of Fort Trew had been destroyed. In the power vacuum that followed, Kenneth MacAlpin and his descendants, the House of Alpin, forged a new unified kingdom, moving his heartland south. The old Gaelic kingdom of Dalriata was absorbed into this new realm, vanishing from the maps of this period. And while this new kingdom was a blend of both Picts and Gaels, contemporary sources like the Annals of Ulster still called the land Pictland, and its ruler the King of the Picts. The new Gaelic name, Alapa, would only come into official use at the beginning of the 10th century. The king of this transformed realm was Constantine, son of Kenneth MacAlpin. Upon his arrival in Pictland, Olaf's act of dominance provoked a violent response from the Pictish king. The Scottish Chronicle tells us that in the year 874, Olaf was killed by King Constantine. While the exact circumstances of Olaf's death are unclear, the later prophecy of Birken claims it was the result of a great battle victory for Constantine. The Dynasty of Ívarr responded with swift and brutal vengeance. The very next year, in 875, a Viking army descended on the Picts and inflicted a crushing defeat on their army at the Battle of Dollar. The timing of this attack, as noted in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, coincides with the campaigns of Ívarr's brother, Halfdan, suggesting it was his forces who carried out this revenge mission. The Chronicle of the Kings of Alapa states that the Picts suffered a terrible slaughter at Dollar, and that the victorious Viking army remained in Pictland for a full year afterwards. The grim postscript to this story came in 876 when King Constantine himself was killed. And while the chronicles are unclear on the details of his death, it is strongly believed that he fell at the hands of the same Viking army that was occupying his kingdom. Ívarr's career would end in Ireland. The Annals of Ulster record his death in 873 AD, awarding him the grand title of King of the Northmen of all Ireland and Britain. The same annals state he died of a sudden and hideous disease. A more elaborate theory, found in the later fragmentary annals of Ireland, has led some historians to suggest this illness was the true origin of his boneless nickname. His brother, Halfdan, would not outlive him for long. In 877 AD, he was killed at the Battle of Strangford Lough, fighting rival Vikings for control of Dublin. With its founding generation gone, the dynasty was now vulnerable, and its enemies did not wait long to strike. In the year 902 AD, a powerful coalition of Irish kings, led by the King of Leinster, stormed the Viking stronghold of Dublin. Ívarr's descendants and their followers were utterly defeated and expelled from their greatest base in Ireland. For 15 years they were exiles scattered across the Scottish Isles and northern England. But from that exile, a new generation was preparing its return. In 917 AD, a great Viking fleet sailed back into Dublin Bay. At its head was Sigtrygg, a grandson of Ivar the Boneless. He had returned to reclaim his inheritance, and with his eventual victory, the Dynasty of Ívarr once again took control of Dublin. The long and complex conflict between the Irish kings and the descendants of Ívarr finally came to a head in the year 1014. For decades, the rival Norse Gaelic towns of Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick had been powerful players in Ireland, with their shifting allegiances often exploited by ambitious Irish overkings. One of these kings, however, would rise above all others: Brian Boru, the King of Munster. This legendary Irish figure had spent decades embroiled in ruthless warfare and cunning diplomacy, clawing his way up to become the High King of Ireland. His relationship with the Dublin Vikings was complex. He was at times their master, their rival, and their ally, using their fleets to further his own aims, even as he sought to curb their power. The final challenge to his authority came from the King of Dublin, Sigtrygg Silkbeard, a direct descendant of Ívarr. Seeking to break Brian's dominance, Sigtrygg gathered a massive coalition of warriors from across the Norse world. On April 23rd, 1014 AD, the two armies met at Clontarf, near Dublin. Brian's forces, drawn from Munster and Connacht, faced Sigtrygg's army, which was bolstered by powerful Viking contingents from the Orkney Islands, the Hebrides, and even Scandinavia. The battle was a long and brutal affair with horrific losses on both sides. By the end of the day, many of the great Viking leaders lay slain. But the victory came at a terrible price. The High King Brian Boru was dead. Later Irish and Icelandic sagas would transform Clontarf into a mythic epic, a grand contest between Irish and foreigner, or a final victory for Christianity over the pagan hordes. But modern historians view these claims with scepticism. The battle was not a simple war against foreign invaders, but rather a vast Irish civil war in which Norse Gaelic factions fought on both sides. Clontarf's true importance was not in who won or lost on the day, but in its consequences. The battle shattered the offensive military power of the Dublin Kingdom. And while the descendants of Ívarr would continue to influence politics across the Irish Sea for another century, they would never again pose a major threat to the most powerful kings of Ireland. So what did the Dynasty of Ívarr accomplish? They were catalysts for long-distance trade and maritime war. They were the founders of ports that became great urban centres. And they were the ancestors of the Norse Gael communities that populated the entire Irish Sea world. Over generations, their branches tied the region together through marriage, force, and commerce. They were not a single empire. They were a sea-born kindred with multiple crowns. As historians like Alex Wolff have argued, it was this mastery of kinship, seafaring, and adaptable rulership that had reshaped the Irish Sea. The Dynasty of Ívarr had forged a new world, bound by their fleets and their blood. But after Clontarf, their great unifying power was broken. The Irish sea world they had created did not vanish, it fractured. It became an arena of rival sea kings, all vying to inherit the pieces of a shattered domain. And the greatest prize of all was the kingdom that lay at its very heart, the kingdom of Mann and the Isles. Set in the heart of the Irish Sea is an island where the Viking legacy is not just history, but a living reality. The Isle of Man in many ways remains a classic and successful Viking polity. It is not part of the United Kingdom, and its people are still ruled by one of the oldest parliaments on earth, the Tynwald, a direct inheritance from its Norse founders. The island is also considered to be the capital of Viking archaeology in Britain, boasting the greatest collection of Scandinavian carved stones outside Scandinavia, and with over 40 pagan burials rich with grave goods. But how was this unique kingdom forged? The historical picture is complex. The annals of Ulster show it was a land long contested, falling under the influence of Gaelic kings in the late 6th century, only to be seized by Brittonic rulers in the 7th century. This left a fractured political landscape, a prize waiting to be claimed. The story of the kingdom begins with a crisis in Norway itself. In the year 880, King Harald Fairhair established himself as the first king of a unified Norway. But his rule was so violent that many of his rivals and their followers sailed west over sea and escaped to the Isles, from where they launched pirate attacks on their former homeland. King Harald pursued them in force. Having crushed the opposition, he added the Isles to the crown of Norway and sent one of his own aristocrats to govern them, a man named Ketil Flatnose. But this trust would soon be betrayed. Not long after his arrival, Ketil declared himself king of the Isles. This act of rebellion, however, seems to have been short-lived, and by the year 900 AD, all trace of Ketil Flatnose had vanished from the records, leaving a power vacuum and a new historical mystery. So who ruled next? Some historians, like R.L. Bremner, give the opinion that the kingdom was held by Danes, while others argue the first true kings of Man and the Isles were the powerful descendants of Ívarr. What is clear is that the Isle of Man had become the jewel in the crown of a new insular kingdom. The silence in the records is broken in the year 914, with the annals of Ulster recording a great sea battle off the coast of Man between two rival Viking leaders, Bardar Otterson and Rognvaldr, with the latter being a grandson of Ívarr the Boneless. Bardar would be defeated and killed in this battle, with the grandson of Ívarr, Rognvaldr, emerging victorious. The Dynasty of Ívarr had now arrived. The island soon became a base for their raids around the Irish Sea, but the true catalyst for the Isle of Man's rise to power came from the east. Following the collapse of the great Viking kingdom of Jorvik, many historians have proposed that a new influx of refugees and treasure poured into the island. This newfound prosperity is visible in the archaeological record. Great hoards of silver buried in the 960s and 970s attest to the island's booming wealth. A new form of currency, the so-called Scoto-Norse ring money, also circulated throughout the Hebrides and Mann during this period. This explosion of wealth was no coincidence. With their rivals in York gone, a branch of the Ívarr dynasty was able to redirect a vast share of trade and political power westwards, transforming the Isle of Man into one of the richest hubs in the Irish Sea. For half a century, this order held. But the Great Battle of Clontarf in 1014 AD would change everything. The old Ívarr dynasty networks were shattered, and the Irish Sea was plunged back into chaos, becoming a bloody arena of local dynasties, sea kings, and continental actors, all searching for power. It was into this new era of crisis and opportunity, in the turbulent decades of the 1060s and 1070s, that a new kind of warlord would soon emerge. In September 1066, the Viking king Harald Hardrada of Norway, one of the two challengers to the English throne, landed an invasion fleet of 300 ships off the northeastern coast. Containing 10,000 men, this fleet sailed inland up the Humber, eventually arriving in Yorkshire. King Harald Hardrada of Norway was accompanied by the exiled Earl, Tostig, who was the brother of the current English king, Harold Godwinson. The other claimant to the English throne was William of Normandy, who maintained the throne had been promised to him by the previous English king, Edward the Confessor. Aware of the Viking threat, William was content to delay his own invasion until Harold Godwinson was at his most vulnerable, dealing with Hardrada in the north. After a bloody but successful engagement against the Earls Morcar and Edwin at Gate Fulford on 20th of September, the Vikings received the surrender of York, which capitulated without resistance in an attempt to prevent the sack of the city. Harold Godwinson, in the meantime, was in the unenviable position of having to decide whether to march north to confront Hardrada, leaving the south of England unprotected against William, or remain where he was, in anticipation of a Norman invasion, leaving Hardrada to consolidate his control in Yorkshire. The English king eventually chose to march north in the hopes of swiftly defeating the Norwegian king, and then being able to return south in time to confront William. Harold Godwinson's army, most likely all mounted troops, reached York on the morning of the 25th of September 1066, reinforced by remnants of Morcar's and Edwin's forces. His army is said to have numbered around 15,000 men. He immediately marched from the city to Stamford Bridge, taking the Viking invaders completely by surprise near their camp. The Battle of Stamford Bridge was a decisive victory for the English king, which resulted in the complete rout of the Viking army and the death of their leader, Harold Hardrada. It's estimated that only 25 longships managed to escape the wreckage of this calamitous defeat, a stark contrast from the original 300 Viking ships that had originally set sail from Norway. During this time, the Chronicle of Mann takes note of a certain ambitious warlord who took part in the battle. He escaped from the wreckage of the defeated Viking army, fleeing west with his followers, eventually setting sail across the Irish Sea from somewhere on England's northwest coast. His name was Godred Crovan. Godred would eventually make landfall on the Isle of Man and would seek sanctuary on the island from its ruler, Godfrey McElroy. Back in England, in the aftermath of the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Harold Godwinson had no time to celebrate his recent triumph. He immediately marched his exhausted army south to face a new invasion. The battle that awaited him would become one of the most famous in the history of these isles. At the Battle of Hastings, Harold Godwinson was defeated and killed by the Norman invader, William the Conqueror. He would go down in history as the last crowned Anglo-Saxon king of England. The Norman conquest of England that followed created a power vacuum across the Irish Sea. With the old Anglo-Saxon kingdom shattered and the new Norman king focused entirely on securing his English throne, the ambitious warlords of the Isles were left to their own devices. And the ambitious refugee Godred Crovan, now a guest of the King of Man, would not let that opportunity pass him by. For 9 years Godred waited patiently, and with the death of his host, King Godfrey McElroy, in the year 1070, this was the moment he had been waiting for. With Godfrey's son, Fingal, now on the throne, Godred's true ambitions were revealed. The chronicles tell of 2 failed expeditions against the island of Man, but his third attempt in 1079 AD would be a masterpiece of brutal cunning. He landed his army by night to the north of the island at Ramsey, hiding 300 men in the woods on the slopes of Skye Hill. At dawn, as the Manx army charged his main force, Godred sprang his trap. The hidden warriors stormed from the woods, attacking the Manxmen from the rear. Their resistance collapsed, and the Manx army was sent into a full bloody rout. And what of the Manx king, Fingal? The chronicles fall silent on this, and he vanishes completely from the historical record, and it is assumed he was either killed in the chaos of the battle or expelled in its aftermath. Godred's victory was absolute. In a shrewd political move to secure his new kingdom, he divided the island, giving the north to the surviving native Manx population, and to the south the Hebridean warriors who had won him the battle. And with his new kingdom secure, Godred turned his ambition towards the greatest prize in the Irish Sea, the city of Dublin. The chronicles record that he seized the great Norse-Irish port around 1091 AD, gaining access to its vast trade networks and manpower. For a time, his authority extended deep into the Irish mainland, but lordship in the Irish Sea was a fragile thing. By the mid-1090s, Godred was driven out of Ireland by the powerful Irish king, Muirchertach Ua Briain. Godred's end eventually came in 1095 AD, with his death being recorded on the Isle of Islay. And the inheritance he left his sons was a kingdom on the brink of civil war. His sons Lagman, Harold, and Olaf immediately turned on each other. The Chronicle of Man details a bitter struggle for control, a familiar pattern across the islands. A kingdom won by a strong warlord, only to be fractured and torn apart by the feuds of his sons. This bitter family feud created a power vacuum that the King of Norway himself would not ignore. King Magnus III, known to history as Magnus Barefoot, descended upon the Isles at the turn of the 12th century to reassert Norwegian authority. The Norse sagas record his campaigns between 1093 and 1103 in brutal detail, telling of fire and plunder throughout the Hebrides, from Mull to Islay. But one famous legend, above all, captures his ambition and cunning. After making a deal with King Edgar of Scotland, Magnus is said to have claimed the entire Kintyre Peninsula by a single dramatic act. He had his longship dragged across the narrow strip of land at Tarbet, with him sitting at the helm. By circumnavigating it, he declared Kintyre to be an island, and therefore part of his Norwegian kingdom. But Magnus's interventions were more than just conquest, they were political theatre. He negotiated with Irish kings, arranged royal marriages, and for a short time even took the title King of Dublin. His actions placed the Isles at the centre of a tense three-way diplomacy between the crowns of Norway, Ireland, and Scotland. After Magnus was killed in Ireland in 1103 AD, his direct control vanished with him. But the memory of Norwegian power endured, leaving the local Crovan rulers to walk a fine line between acknowledging their distant overlord and cultivating local support. Amid these great power struggles, the kingdom of Mann forged its own distinctive character. Its population was a mix of Norse settlers and Gaelic speakers, a hybrid people known as the Galloglass. The state they created was a fusion of both worlds, a durable hybrid identity that would define the kingdom of the Isles for generations to come. Out of the long shadow of his family's feuds emerged the man who would finally bring order to this chaos. Olaf Godrinsson, Godred Crovin's youngest son. He is remembered as the long-reigning king who brought stability to the Isles in the first half of the 12th century. The Chronicle of Mann records his achievements as being a great patron of the church, founding a Russian abbey, and as a skilled diplomat who forged ties across the Irish Sea, consolidating the kingdom his father had won. But the peace he so carefully built was shattered. In 1153, Olaf's ambitious nephews, the sons of his brother Harald, arrived from Dublin. In a brutal act of betrayal, they murdered their aging uncle by decapitating him. The assassination of Olaf plunged the Kingdom of the Isles back into a bloody civil war, creating a massive power vacuum across the entire western seaboard. The Crovan dynasty was now fractured and vulnerable. This was an opportunity that would soon be seized by an ambitious warlord on the mainland to the north, someone who had been steadily building his own power base throughout the Inner Hebrides of Scotland in Argyll. The chaos in the Kingdom of Mann provided the perfect moment for this person, who would one day rise in power to become the next great king of the Isles. That person's name was Somerled. Some modern historians have called him the Hammer of the Norse, a man who drove a renewed Gaelic energy across the western seaboard and rose to be styled Rex Insularum, King of the Isles. He would become the single most powerful island lord of his generation, a figure who remade seaways into power, built a network of strongholds, and in life and death shaped the destiny of Mann, Argyll, and the Hebrides. He would be known as Somerled. Yet Somerled himself is an embodiment of contradictions. A Norse Gael to some, a Gaelic champion to others. A man whose biography refuses to fit in a tidy box. The mystery begins with his name. Somerled is Norse in form, meaning summer sailor, but his father's and grandfather's names, preserved in clan sources, are purely Gaelic. This single contradiction has fueled a debate that has lasted for centuries. The Clan Donald tradition, supported by pro-Gaelic chroniclers, like the Reverend A. MacDonald, insists he was a champion of Gaelic reassertion against Norse power. Others, like the historian John Bannerman, connect his family to ancient Irish dynasties, like the Argeala and the E. McCuish. But other voices like R.L. Bremner argued that after 3 centuries of settlement, Somerled's world was so thoroughly mixed that a pure ancestry was almost impossible. He was, in their view, the product of an inevitably hybrid culture. This tangle of opinions matters because how we see his ancestry changes how we see his actions. Was he a Gaelic avenger, reclaiming his ancestral lands? Or was he a man of mixed blood, whose ambitions were driven by a pursuit of power and not by pure ethnic hatred? Perhaps the most accurate way to see Somerled is as a product of a deeply entangled western seaboard, a region where names, loyalties, and identities were layered, and where the words Norse and Gaelic were often overlapping categories, not exclusive labels. With that caveat in mind, the Clan Donald tradition tells the story of Somerled's rise. It begins in the early 1130s in the lands of Morvern on the western mainland of Scotland. His family was said to be at a low point, their lands seized by more powerful pro-Norse rivals. His grandfather, Gaelic Origins, had reportedly been driven from Argyll into exile in Ireland. His father, Gaelic, earned the unflattering nickname Gaelic of the Cave, after his own failed attempts to reclaim their territory resulted in his frequent hiding in Highland caves. While these are clan memories and not contemporary chronicles, they paint a plausible picture of a world damaged by centuries of Norse pressure, a world that might produce a restless and capable son. When Somerled came of age, he took command of his father's scattered forces and launched a campaign of recovery. But the enemies he fought were not simple foreign occupiers. 3.5 centuries of Norse presence had deeply entangled the people of the western seaboard. His opponents were often Norse Gaelic magnates themselves. This was not a sweeping ethnic war, but a brutal contest between rival factions for land, sea power, and patronage. The turning point came in a battle on the Morvern mainland, sometime in the mid-1130s, which resulted in Somerled routing his rivals, driving them across the River Shiel and forcing them to flee to the sea in their longships. From this single victory, his power grew as dispossessed clans and Gaelic groups rallied to his banner. He consolidated his mainland holdings in Argyll. He seized the island of Mull to control the Sound of Mull, the great sea highway that ran inland from the Hebrides. From this, Somerled slowly grew his power and commanded the construction of a network of fortified strongholds, placed at strategic locations throughout the Hebrides, that would allow him to control vital seaways and harbours. Ardtornish emerges in tradition as an early centre of his authority. By controlling a strategically located fortification on the mainland at Ardtornish, and by holding the islands of Mull and Islay, Somerled secured command of all the channels that connected mainland Argyll to the Inner Hebrides and beyond. Somerled continued to forge his new kingdom, continuing to build a network of strongholds at strategic locations. But among these strongholds, one place would become the heart of his future island empire: the serene Hebridean island of Islay on the west coast. Local tradition dates the founding of a central power seat on Loch Finlagan to 1138 AD. This was not a fortress in the traditional sense. It was an administrative centre, built across two small islands, within a small body of water within the mainland of Islay. Eilean Mor, the Big Island, and Eilean na Corla, the island of the council. It would become the most closely associated seat of power for both Somerled and the future lords of the Isles. The choice of this inland loch has long puzzled historians. Why would a man whose power depended on the sea build his capital away from the coast? Part of the answer lies in the land itself, the fertile soil and valuable minerals. But Finlagan was not isolated. The nearby waters of Loch Indal provided a perfect harbour where a fleet of galleys could be drawn ashore. But the true power of this place ran deeper. This was already an ancient seat of power long before Somerled arrived, a place known to his Gaelic and Norse ancestors. In choosing Finlagan, Somerled was not just building a new capital, he was claiming a legacy. With his power base now secure at Finlagan, Somerled could look outward to his most powerful neighbour, the King of Mann and the Isles, Olaf Godredsson. While historical records are limited, legend states that after a series of skirmishes, the two kings made peace. In 1140 AD, Somerled secured his most important alliance. He married Ragnhildis, the daughter of the Manx king, Olaf. With this union, a formidable maritime alliance bloc was forged, combining the rising power of Somerled's Argyll region, the established island kingdom of Olaf from the Isle of Man to the Outer Hebrides, and the naval resources of Fergus, the unpredictable lord of Galloway. Their combined fleets were a powerful deterrent to the acquisitive Norman magnates in England and the opportunistic Norse lords of Dublin. But this alliance was also a careful hedge against a threat from within. Fergus of Galloway was a powerful but unreliable partner. For Somerled, the union with the Manx kingdom secured his southern flank. For Olaf, it provided a powerful counterweight to his potentially treacherous son-in-law. By about 1140 AD, a formidable but fragile unified front had been established along the western seaways. But the greatest potential of instability to this alliance came from Ireland. Throughout the 1140s, the Norse factions of Dublin were locked in a brutal power struggle. Like Ronald Thorkelson and Ottar Ottarson were a constant threat. A turbulence that could drag Man and Argyll into a wider war at any moment. Such was the nature of this world, a web of alliances held together by ambition and the constant threat of chaos. In the year 1153, the entire western seaboard was plunged into crisis through multiple coinciding events. King David of Alapa had died, leaving the throne to his 12-year-old grandson, Malcolm IV. Somerled, who had sworn loyalty to King David, refused to renew his oath to this new child king. Instead, he immediately launched an open challenge to royal authority by conducting raids into the western mainlands of Alapa. But as the Scottish kingdom faltered, the kingdom of Man was torn apart by murder. The aged King Olaf was assassinated by his ambitious nephews from Dublin. His son, Godred the Black, was away in Norway at the time of his father's murder. But Godred soon returned in a swift response. With Norwegian military support at his back, he landed his forces on the Isle of Man and captured his murderous cousins, having them killed in a brutal manner through decapitation, and displaying their remains along the walls of the royal residence of Peel Castle. It was into this chaos that the next phase of the conflict began. The Chronicle of Mann tells of a plot forged by a powerful Manx chief, Thorfinn Otterson. Due to the severe unpopularity of Godred the Black, some Manx nobles secretly plotted to have him replaced. They approached Somerled and proposed that Somerled's own son, Dougal, be made king of Man. Somerled, unsurprisingly, agreed. If his son Dougal could claim the throne of Man, it would make Somerled the overlord of the entire kingdom of the Isles. But other Manx chiefs were alarmed, and one Paul Balkinson is said to have raced overnight to alert Godred of the conspiracy. Upon hearing this news, Godred hastily prepared his fleet. Somerled, in turn, mustered some 80 longships and sailed them out to sea to confront Godred. The chronicles do not provide key details of the battle that was about to happen. All that is stated is that the two sea kings clashed in the winter darkness off Islay, in a battle that would be known as the Battle of Epiphany on January 5th, 1156. The fighting apparently raged all night, fought under oar, with no sails set, longship pressed to longship, with freezing Atlantic winds no doubt hurling across the battle zone, amplifying the struggle of the fighting. The result was a bloody stalemate. The two leaders agreed to an uneasy peace, dividing the Sea Kingdom between them. But this uneasy peace would not last. In 1158 AD, Somerled returned to finish the war. He sailed to the Isle of Man with a fleet of 53 Berlins for what would become known as the Battle of the Isle of Man. He routed Godred's fleet, landed his forces and crushed the opposition ashore, bringing the entire island into submission. Godred the Black was defeated and fled into exile in Norway. For Somerled, this succession of victories marked his zenith. By 1158, he was the dominant power of the western seaboard, king of Argyll and lord of the Isles. By 1160 AD, Somerled stood at the height of his power. His realm stretched from the Butt of Lewis down to the Isle of Man, and he was officially recognised by the King of Norway as the King of the Sudres. There were now two powerful kings in these northern lands, Malcolm IV as the royal authority on the mainland, and Somerled as the paramount power of the west and the Isles. A fragile peace held between them, but the board was in motion. In that same year, in 1160, the Chronicle of Holyrood records that Malcolm launched a ruthless campaign against the powerful Fergus of Galloway, crushing his rival and forcing the Wolf of Galloway into a monastery. Then, 3 years later in 1163, King Malcolm made his final move. He negotiated a humiliating peace with King Henry II of England, surrendering the lands of Northumbria and Cumbria to the English king. But this could be seen as a strategic sacrifice, as it now removed the threat from his southern border and freed his hands to deal with his one remaining great rival. The chess game was over. The stage was set for war. In 1164, Somerled made his final, fateful move. At the advanced age of 64, he risked everything he had built on one last high-stakes gamble: the conquest of the Scottish kingdom itself. Aware of a Scottish army gathering against him at Renfrew, he decided on a preemptive strike. The annals of Ulster record the scale of his ambition. A vast host of men from Kintyre, Argyll, the Hebrides, and even Dublin, carried in a fleet of 164 ships. They sailed up the Clyde and landed near Renfrew on the Scottish mainland. But the Scottish Royal Army, led by Walter FitzAlan, the High Steward of Scotland, was waiting for them. And here the two worlds of medieval Scotland collided. On one side was Somerled's lighter-equipped Norse Gaelic warriors. On the other, a wall of steel, the heavily armoured Scoto-Norman knights and men-at-arms. The fighting was said to be ferocious. Somerled's warriors crashed against the disciplined armoured line of the Scottish army, but they could not break through. The battle became a brutal grinding stalemate, and in the chaos of that melee, the 64-year-old king was caught in the heart of the fighting. He was struck by a javelin, then cut down by the sword. In the same brutal clash, his eldest son, Galloglass, fell beside him. A contemporary Latin poem, the Carmen de Morte Somerledi, captures the brutal finality of the defeat, describing Somerled, struck down by spear and sword, his followers slain in great numbers, and the survivors scattered by wind and wave. The great invasion was over. The remnant of Somerled's army fled to their longships and vanished back into the west. Legend states they carried their king's body with them, but Somerled's final resting place remains unproven, a final mystery for the great king of the Isles. The disaster at Renfrew cast a long shadow. For generations, the islanders would not launch another major challenge against the Scottish crown. Not until 1411 at the Battle of Harlaw, when Somerled's own descendant, Donald of Islay, would fight the royal army to a famous stalemate. Somerled was dead, but the sea kingdom he had forged endured. In the aftermath of Somerled's death, Godred the Black returned from his exile in Norway, and with the help from the Norwegian king, he reclaimed his Manx kingdom. This resulted in the kingdom of the Isles being divided. Mann and the Outer Hebrides would be under the control of the Crovan dynasty, while the remaining lands of Somerled's kingdom, Kintyre and the Inner Hebrides, would fall to his sons Dougal, Ranald and Angus. They held the territories their father had won and divided the lands between them. This lineage of the dynasty of Somerled would branch off through one of his grandsons, which would give birth to the powerful clan MacDonald, a clan that would rule the Western Isles of Scotland for another 3 centuries, styling themselves as the Lords of the Isles. For generations, the Lords of the Isles governed the Hebrides and the western coasts almost as independent kings. From their spiritual heartland on the island of Islay, they maintained their own council, enacted their own laws, and commanded their own fleets, often in direct challenge to the authority of the Scottish crown. But the very independence that made the lordship so powerful would also prove to be its undoing. Fierce internal rivalries would later weaken Clan Donald through power struggles for the leadership of the clan, with events finally exploding in the 1480s, culminating at the disastrous Battle of Bloody Bay. It was a bitter civil war pitting the Lord of the Isles, John MacDonald of Islay, against his own son, Angus Og. The conflict was a self-inflicted wound, bleeding the lordship from within, and giving the Scottish crown the opportunity it had been waiting for. At the end of the 15th century, King James IV moved against the divided and weakened lordship. He stripped the MacDonalds of their titles, seized their lands, and brought the era of the independent sea kingdom to a decisive end. The world of the Norse Gaels was defined by fusion. After the initial violence of the Viking Age gave way to settlement, two powerful cultures began a centuries-long process of blending. To truly understand this new hybrid society, we must look at the language they spoke, the laws they lived by, and the unique culture they forged. In the towns and islands of the Irish Sea and the Scottish Western Isles. To imagine this world, picture a scene from one of their thriving towns, sometime in the 10th century. A young woman walks down a narrow laneway, her woolen smock fastened with iron pins. She steps out into the sprawling market square, where traders sell furs, leather, and jewellery. The girl greets an old merchant in Old Norse, who replies with a wave, revealing a polished Thor's hammer around his neck. Moments later, she brushes past an irritated fisherwoman and apologises in flawless Irish. The young woman in our scene is a Norse Gael. Her mother might be an Irish freedwoman, her father an Ostman. She and thousands like her populated the bustling coastal towns of Ireland. Places like Dublin, Limerick, Waterford, Wexford, and Cork. They were a people raised in a world of two cultures, speaking two languages, hearing the ancestral stories from both sides of their parents' heritage. The most intimate evidence of this fusion is preserved in language. The Gaelic language absorbed a host of Old Norse words, especially for the sea. The Gaelic bod came from the Norse botter, and ackerseid from the Norse aker-e. In the new towns, commercial terms like margad also entered the vocabulary. The landscape itself became a linguistic map, revealing the different stories of this Norse settlement. On the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides, the Norse linguistic footprint was so total that Norse place names came to outnumber Gaelic ones 4-1. Here, ancient farm names still carry their Norse endings, like Bost from Bolststadr, the Old Norse word for a farm. But on Isla, the story is one of true synthesis. Old Norse names were given a Gaelic dressing, with the Norse Eikis Dalar becoming Glen Egadale. New hybrid names were also forged, with the Gaelic word for a settlement, Ballie, being added to a Norse name to create places like Baloli or Olaf's Farm. These names, etched into the landscape, are the undeniable proof the Norse were no longer foreign invaders. They had become an integral part of the Gaelic world. The encounter between Norse and Gaels was a clash of two worlds, a collision of two fundamental ideas about land and power. The Norse brought the Germanic tradition of udal law, where land was owned absolutely and individually. The Gaelic world, however, was built on the clan system, where land was held in common by the king group. From this collision, new hybrid systems were born. For taxation and mustering fleets, the Norse Gaels created the ounceland and pennyland, a system of valuing land by its productivity. a Norse innovation applied to a Gaelic landscape. The state they forged was not a kingdom of land. It was a thalassocracy, a maritime empire where a king's true strength was measured by his fleet. The core of this political world was the open-air assembly, the Thing. And the most famous and enduring of these is the Tynwald on the Isle of Man, a parliament founded by the Norse Vikings over 1,000 years ago that continues to enact laws and govern the island to this very day. The religious world of the Norse Gaels was one of slow adaptation. The pragmatic nature of Norse paganism meant that Christ could initially be seen as another powerful god, alongside Thor and Odin. This blending is vividly illustrated by archaeological finds, such as jewellery moulds that could cast both pagan Thor's hammer and Christian crosses from the same matrix. The culture of this mixed group can also be found in the very soil, in the remains of everyday life. Archeology at sites like Bornish in South Uist, an island off the west coast of Scotland, reveals a diverse economy of farming and fishing. And this Norse legacy is also built into the very stones of the Hebrides. The traditional Hebridean Black House, a stone-built ground-hugging croft, strongly resembles similar houses from Viking-era Norway. But if their life was on the land, their power was on the sea. And the supreme example of this fusion was the Hebridean Berlin. This iconic galley was a direct evolution of the Viking longship, a process of innovation pioneered by great sea kings like Somerled in the 12th century to gain a crucial advantage over his rivals. While it retained the clinker-built hull of its ancestor, the Norse Gaels refined the design with a broader hull for stability and a crucial technological improvement, a stern-post rudder which made it far more agile in the treacherous sea locks of the Isles. For 400 years, the Berlin was the workhorse of the Western Isles. It was the engine of great sea kingdoms, providing the lords of the Isles and the great clans of the Hebrides with the power to dominate the seaways. From the mid-13th century onwards, these same ships began to carry a new and fearsome cargo. They ferried the next great export of the Norse Gaels from Scotland to Ireland, the elite, heavily armoured mercenary warriors who came to be known as the Galloglass. The English occupation of Ireland began in the year 1166, when Dermot McElroy, King of Leinster, was deposed. He then appealed to England for help. Soon, land-hungry English and Welsh knights were pouring into Ireland. A terrible war of conquest had begun. The native Irish chiefs fought back, but lacking a single king to rally behind, they suffered defeat after defeat. The Irish chiefs faced a stark choice: perish or bring yet more foreign fighters into their country. They looked north, across the sea to the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. Here, a hardy society of Norse Gaelic warriors had been forged, their ancestors being a mix of Celtic tribesmen and Viking seafarers. From the lineage of the great sea king, Somerled, came powerful warrior clans: the MacDougals, the MacDonalds, the McSheehys, and the McCrurys. The foreigners the Irish chiefs turned to were these men, the Galloglass. It is from shores exactly like the ones beneath the walls of Castle Sween on the west coast of Scotland that their story in Ireland truly begins. In the first half of the 13th century, these waters would have been alive with activity, as the first generation of these warriors prepared their longships. But for many, the journey to Ireland was not a choice, it was an exile. The powerful McSweeneys, lords of this very part of Argyll, were the first to go. In 1262, they were ejected from strongholds like Castle Sween, with their lands being lost to the Stuarts of Menteith. Ireland offered them a new beginning, and they were not alone. Decades later, the powerful MacDougals of Lorne would suffer a similar fate. From their ancestral seat at Denolly Castle, they bitterly opposed Robert the Bruce in his quest for the Scottish crown. When Robert the Bruce finally seized the Scottish throne in 1306, the MacDougals were left broken and landless, forced to flee to Ireland, where their name would eventually become MacDowell. And so, arriving in their longships, it was often the losers of Scotland's brutal power struggle, these dispossessed Gaelic lords, who would make landfall in the north of Ireland, ready to forge a new legacy as the most feared mercenaries of the age. The Galloglass lived for war. In a land broken by conflict, their sole function was to fight. Ireland was the country in which they battled. Ireland's chiefs and warlords were their paymasters. Without their protection, no Irish chief could hope to stay in power. In war, they formed the elite vanguard. In peace, they acted as bodyguards and enforcers. From a time before Robert the Bruce in the 1200s until the age of Shakespeare in the early 1600s, the Galloglass were Ireland's most fearsome fighting men. Their arrival in Ireland had an immediate and dramatic effect. The English advance was checked. They quickly earned a reputation as instigators of revolt, with the English general Sir Henry Bagenal later calling them the firebrand and nurse of rebellion. Clad in a heavy mail hauberk over a padded jacket called an acqueton, and protected by an iron helmet, the Galloglass was a formidable sight. But the true symbol of their power was the weapon in their hands, the formidable two-handed Sparth axe, a massive battle axe of Scandinavian origin, which could cleave through a helmet with a single mighty blow. They also wielded the great two-handed broadsword, a weapon that would become legendary. The English administrator Edmund Spenser described them as huge and hideous, real-life giants with great skill in single combat, against whom only an English knight stood a chance. Pitched battles in the European style were rare in Ireland during this period. A typical encounter involved several hundred men clashing with lightning speed, and it was in these brutal running battles that a Galloglass had the opportunity to carve out a name for himself. Their role was specific and crucial. A master Irish poet recalled the heavy responsibility given to them by their Irish patrons to take the vanguard and rearguard of the army. The Galloglass were the decisive force in Irish warfare. In 1423, northeast of Meath, Mulmurray McSweeney led his warriors as part of a great army of O'Donnells and O'Neills, shattering the English forces sent from the Pale. But their loyalty was to their paymaster, not to a single cause. The ultimate expression of this brutal reality came in the year 1504, at the battle known as the Hill of the Axes at Knockdhu. In this vast pan-Irish civil war, Irish clans hired Galloglass to fight on both sides. The result was a horrific slaughter, a brutal collision that pitted these elite warriors against each other, and their loyalty could even be bought by the very English they had so often been hired to fight. Spurred by a quest for land and power, many were prepared to work for a wealthy English paymaster who could offer more in rewards. They became a permanent part of Irish society, sustained by a system known as Bhuanacht, and granted land in exchange for hereditary military service. They transformed from mercenaries into a settled, landed warrior class. Over generations, they assimilated completely, recruiting native Irishmen into their ranks and intermarrying with the Gaelic nobility, until the term Galloglass described a type of warrior of both Scottish and Irish descent. Their era came to an end in the late 16th century, challenged by the rise of gunpowder weapons and the Tudor conquest of Ireland. Their last great role was during the 9 Years' War, but the defeat at the Battle of Kinsale in 1601, followed by the flight of the Earls in 1607, marked the end of the Gaelic world that had sustained them. The Galloglass did not simply vanish. After 3 centuries, their families had already merged with the very people they came to serve, weaving their own Norse Gaelic ancestry into the tapestry of the Irish nation. The foreign warrior had, at long last, come home. The art of the Norse Gaels is a new and distinct visual language, forged in the dynamic world of the Irish Sea. It was a language of power, used by sea kings and merchant princes to declare their place in the world. Their identity was a paradox, at once local and international. Christian, yet forever tied to a pagan warrior past. From precious metalwork to monumental stone carvings, their art tells the story of this stunning hybrid culture. Metal was the ultimate expression of elite status. One of the most spectacular surviving artifacts is the Waterford kite brooch, a masterpiece of Hiberno-Norse craftsmanship from around 1100 AD. Its shape is a traditional Irish kite design, but its surface is a testament to a cosmopolitan world, covered in intricate gold filigree and studded with amethyst-coloured glass. This was not a church treasure, but a secular object, commissioned by a powerful new urban elite to fasten a heavy cloak, a potent symbol of the wealth and ambition of a great port town. If the brooch represents the taste of one wealthy individual, the Galloway hoard, buried around 900 AD, represents the power of an entire ruling faction. Discovered in 2014, it is the richest collection of Viking Age objects ever found in Britain. It contains a stunning Anglo-Saxon Christian cross, a beautiful gold bird-shaped pin, and a silver gilt vessel of Persian origin. This collection is a material biography of a people with a fluid identity, mixing Viking arm rings with symbols of Anglo-Saxon Christianity and exotic goods from the Far East. The most telling detail is found on 4 of the silver arm rings. Though they are a classic Norse Gael design, they are inscribed with Anglo-Saxon runes spelling Old English names. This deliberate fusion is a powerful statement in itself. a classic Norse Gael object that is marked with Anglo-Saxon runes to spell Old English names, the clear sign of a ruler who could navigate multiple worlds. The silver arm rings found in the hoard were more than just treasure. They were the very currency of the Irish Sea world. These broad band rings were a conspicuous display of personal wealth, but they were also practical capital. When payment was needed, a piece could be hacked off, creating what is known as hack silver. The widespread distribution of these rings, from Ireland to England, shows they functioned as a kind of regional currency, the hard currency that forged and bound the Norse Gael world together. While metal expressed portable wealth, the most permanent artistic statements of the Norse Gaels were carved in stone. On the Isle of Mann, we meet the first named artist of this world, Gaut Bjornsson. Active in the 10th century, he took the traditional form of a Celtic high cross and decorated it with interwoven patterns taken directly from the Norse Bori art style. But the most powerful evidence of this fusion is not in the art style alone, it is in the words carved alongside it. The full runic inscription tells the story of its own creation. It names the artist, the Norseman Gaut, and it names the patron who paid for the cross, a man with the Gaelic name, Male Bridge. It is a hybrid society captured in a single commission. A Norse artist working for a Gaelic patron to create a monument that blended both of their worlds. But the most sophisticated artistic statement of this fusion is found on Thorwald's cross, also from the Isle of Man. This monument presents a brilliant theological argument in stone. On one side, the old world dies. The Norse god Odin is devoured by the wolf Fenrir at Ragnarok. On the other side, the new world triumphs. Christ, holding a cross and a book, stands victorious over a serpent. The carver masterfully used the pagan myth to explain the new faith. The death of Odin represents the end of the old gods. The triumph of Christ represents the promised renewal that follows. It was a powerful tool of conversion, framing Christianity as the fulfillment of their own ancestral stories. The same artistic conversation was happening across the Irish Sea. The spectacular Gosforth cross in Cumbria, in England, shows the same technique. Over 14 feet tall, it depicts the Christian crucifixion alongside scenes from Ragnarok. These stunning similarities show that artists and patrons across the Norse Gael world were engaged in a shared dialogue, creating a common visual language to reconcile their past with their new faith. While art reveals the soul of the Norse Gaels, archaeology uncovers the foundations of their power, a legacy written in stone and earth across the North Atlantic. In Ireland, this legacy is not in isolated castles, but in the very fabric of its greatest port cities. In Dublin, excavations at Wood Quay have laid bare the dense timber houses and defensive walls of the original Norse town. While the site of Christ Church Cathedral was first established by the Hiberno-Norse king, Sitric Silkbeard. In Waterford, the iconic Reginald's Tower still stands upon the original Norse fortifications that once guarded the harbour. These were the economic engines of the Norse Gael world. Beyond these bustling trade hubs, their military might was projected from a network of formidable island and coastal strongholds. On St. Patrick's Isle on the Isle of Man, the old Celtic monastery was transformed into the commanding Norse fortress of Peel Castle. In the Scottish Isles, Finlagin on Islay became the symbolic centre of power for Somerled and the later lords of the Isles. And from imposing coastal castles like Castle Tiorum, Artornish and BJORTH Castle, these island lords controlled the vital sea lanes that were the key to mastering the Hebrides. These were not fortresses of the land, they were fortresses of the sea. Their massive curtain walls followed the natural contours of the rock, and from their strongholds, the Norse Gael lords launched the fleets of Berlin longboats that were the true source of their power. The archaeological heart of this world is the Isle of Man. The Viking finds here are distributed more densely than anywhere else in the British Isles, making it a true capital of Viking history. But the evidence suggests this was a late conquest. The historian James Graham Campbell, after studying the island's magnificent pagan graves, concluded that permanent settlement only began after 900 AD. The nature of these burials points to the arrival of a warrior elite and a violent takeover. A single grave at Balladul tells a stark story of this conquest. Here, the newcomers placed a Viking ship burial directly into an existing Christian cemetery. It was a deliberate act of desecration. The new grave dug straight through the old ones. Into the ship was placed a man with a severed head, with a woman laid beside him. Over them was a piled layer of burned bones from a horse, ox, dog, and a cat. A scene of possible animal and human sacrifice. At the end of the ship stood a large post, perhaps a mast or a totem, a powerful pagan symbol stamping its authority on a conquered sacred site. This practice of marking the landscape was widespread. In Derby Parish, on the northwest of the island, many ancient farms have great burial mounds on their land, still visible from the sea to this very day. These mounds were likely raised by the original Viking settlers who founded the farms. They stood for generations as a permanent declaration, a clear message to anyone sailing by that coast. For a fellow Viking, it was a welcome. For any trespasser, it was a stark warning. Vikings lived here. Nearby, another Viking burial reveals a far more unsettling story. At a place called Ballaterre, a burial took place around 900 AD. First, a Viking warrior dressed in a woolen cloak was laid to rest in a coffin with his broken sword, his shield, and his spears. A mound of sand and turf was then built over his grave, but the ritual did not end there. On top of this newly made mound, the body of a young woman was placed. She had been killed by a single terrible blow from a sword or an axe, a strike so powerful that it had sheared off the back of her skull. Her body was then covered with a thick layer of cremated animal bones, ox, horse, pig, sheep, and dog, before a final layer of earth completed the mound. The meaning of this act remains a mystery, a possible human sacrifice to accompany the warrior into the afterlife. But a famous account from a distant land offers a chilling parallel. The Arab traveller Ahmed ibn Falan, journeying among the Volga Vikings, the Rus, provided a detailed description of a ship burial he witnessed. He details a funeral that took several days. He watched as one of the dead chief's former slave girls volunteered to accompany him into the afterlife. After a long process of preparation, she was brought to the ship, where an old woman known as the Angel of Death killed her. Finally, her body was placed beside her master and was cremated with him. Here at Ballaterra, in the silent remains of a woman killed by a single violent blow to the head, we may be seeing a striking echo of that same dark ritual, played out on the shores of the Isle of Mann. Archaeology also provides powerful glimpses into the arrival of the Vikings in Galloway. The excavations at Whithorn, led by Peter Hill, show the first signs of this violent new era, with the church there being destroyed by fire in the 840s. A clue from the decades that followed is a mixed hoard found at Talnotry, deposited around the year 875 AD. Its contents, including Arabic and Frankish coins, suggest it passed through Viking hands, and its burial may be linked to the northern campaigns of the Viking leader, Halfdan. Based on such evidence, the historian David Dumville concluded that by 900 AD, Galloway had fallen under the control of Vikings from the Western Isles. But conquest soon gave way to commerce. By the year 1000 AD, the same site at Whithorn had been transformed. Peter Hill describes a thriving commercial settlement, with a sophisticated Norse Gael population, complete with paved areas and drainage gullies. The houses here were not the long rectangular shape of a rural farmstead, but were squared, a distinct feature of urban Viking settlements, also found in major trading hubs like Dublin and York. This design represents a practical adaptation to life in a crowded town, and is powerful evidence connecting Galloway directly to the wider economic world of the Irish Sea. This community at Whithorn was part of a major maritime network. Archaeologists have found evidence of local manufacturing, such as the making of antler combs. The settlement's extensive trade connections are revealed by the imported goods found there. These include bronze stick pins from Ireland, glass beads, a coin of King Canute minted in Chester, and a Hiberno Norse coin from Dublin. This combination of house styles and traded goods strongly suggests powerful links with the territories across the sea, which were ruled by the descendants of Ívarr. The era of Norse dominance, which had reshaped the Irish Sea and the Western Isles for nearly 5 centuries, eventually came to an end. The defeat at Clontarf in 1014 AD had already curtailed the power of the Dublin Vikings in Ireland, and the arrival of the Anglo-Normans in the 12th century created a powerful new force in the region. In Scotland, the beginning of the end came on October 2nd, 1263, when the great Norse Hebridean fleet of King Håkon IV of Norway was caught in a devastating storm that drove parts of his fleet ashore near the modern-day town of Largs. The following day, his ships were attacked by forces of the Scottish king, Alexander III. The resulting battle was a fierce but inconclusive skirmish. Its true importance, however, was strategic. The event marked the end of major Norwegian military incursions on the Scottish mainland, with the political fallout being decisive. In 1266 AD, Håkon's son and successor, King Magnus IV, signed the Treaty of Perth. With this treaty, the King of Norway formally ceded the Isle of Man and all the Hebrides to the Scottish Crown, in return for an annual payment bringing centuries of official Norse rule in these isles to an end. More than 2 centuries after losing the Hebrides, the end of Norway's remaining empire in Britain was sealed not by an act of war, but by a royal wedding. The story began with the betrothal of Scotland's king, James III, to Margaret of Denmark, the daughter of King Christian I of Norway. With the Norwegian king unable to pay his daughter's full dowry as promised, he was forced to pledge his own lands as security. First on September 8th, 1468, he pawned off the islands of Orkney, and then, when the debt remained outstanding, he added Shetland to the pledge on May 28th, 1469. The final act came in 1472 when, with the dowry still unpaid, the Scottish Parliament formally annexed both territories to the Crown. Though the rule of Norwegian kings had officially ended, the legacy of the Norse people on these islands was already permanent. But the ultimate evidence of this legacy is not found in chronicles or carved on stones. It is etched into our very DNA. Modern genetic research has revolutionized our understanding, revealing a story far more complex than simple conquest. In the former Norse Gael territories of the Hebrides, Orkney, and Shetland, a significant percentage of the male population carries a Y chromosome of direct Norwegian origin. In the Orkney Islands, the results were stunning. Approximately 25% of the entire DNA pool can be traced back to Norwegian ancestors. But the legacy of the Norse Gaels was not confined to the shores of Britain and Ireland. As their new culture flourished in the Irish Sea, it spread outwards, carried on longships to the very edges of the known world. Iceland and the Faroe Islands. Here, modern genetics tells a startling story. Studies by institutions like Decode Genetics in Iceland reveal a dramatic pattern in the ancestry of the first settlers. While the majority of the male Y chromosome lineage traces back to Scandinavia, a staggering 62% of the female mitochondrial DNA comes from Gaelic stock, from Ireland and Scotland. This genetic picture is echoed in the Icelandic sagas. The Book of Settlements details the arrival of powerful Norse Gaelic figures, like Odd the Deep-Minded, who led her followers from the Hebrides to Iceland. Even the very first settler named in the Farainga saga, Grimur Kamban, bore a Gaelic surname. Archeology adds another layer, suggesting Celtic monks may have reached the Faroe Islands centuries before the main Viking settlements. And the landscape itself holds the memory of this fusion. Place names across Iceland bear clear Gaelic roots, like Bekkensstaðir, Becken's Place, or Írafell, Mount Irish. The settlement of these remote North Atlantic islands was not just a Norse story, it was a Gaelic one too, carried on the same westward tide northwards to the edge of the known world. For the Northern Isles, this powerful genetic link was expected. The Norse controlled Orkney and Shetland for many centuries. Here, their influence runs deep. The true mystery lay further south, in the Western Islands, long considered a bastion of Gaelic ancestry. Here, the story was supposed to be different, but modern genetic research now offered the tools to finally uncover the truth. Landmark studies like the People of the British Isles project and the ongoing work of scientists like Dr. Jim Wilson allowed us to look back through time into the very bloodlines of the modern populations, and what they found changes everything. To find the true answers to this genetic question, The project focused on the very heartland of the old Gaelic kingdom, the Isle of Islay. Islay has long been considered a heartland of Gaeldom, a direct inheritance from the ancient kingdom of Dalriata. Its local families, the Elaks, have long identified as the direct descendants of the Gaels who endured the Viking Age. But the DNA results turn that entire narrative on its head. When the islanders had their DNA tested, many discovered, to their astonishment, that a significant portion of their genetic heritage was not Gaelic, but Norwegian. The conclusion was unavoidable. The Viking settlement here was not a temporary occupation, or even a simple mixing of peoples. It was a large-scale population replacement. The modern islanders are largely descended not from the Gaels who survived the Vikings, but from the Vikings themselves. And the evidence is not just in the bloodlines, it is etched into the landscape itself. As scholar Alan McNiven notes, the oldest and most important farm names on the island are of clear Old Norse origin. Names like Glen Egadale from Eikedalar or Oak Tree Valley and Conisby from Conisbur are found all over the island, a permanent linguistic footprint of a deep and lasting Norse settlement. But this does not mean the Vikings simply erased the Gaelic world. The story the evidence tells is one of a remarkable transformation. The Norse who settled here, who became the dominant genetic ancestors of the modern population, eventually adopted the Gaelic language and culture. And so Gaelic reasserted itself, not because the Gaels returned or outlasted the Vikings, but because the Vikings themselves became Gaels. They chose to adopt the language and customs of their new home, creating the truly hybrid Norse Gaelic people. The Vikings, in the end, never left. They are still here.